Dobro. History. Archive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going back in time to a specific moment that really acted as a fault line for modern South Korean society.
It's a fascinating and honestly a deeply revealing moment.
We're not just looking at a crime, not really. We're looking at a court case from the mid-1950s that put an entire culture on trial.
Exactly. We're in Seoul, 1955. It's just 2 years after the armistice that paused the Korean War. And the city is, it's still rubble in a lot of places. The focus is on rebuilding.
But the real war, the sources show us, was happening on a different front. It was psychological, moral?
Yeah, society was asking this huge question. The war just shattered centuries of tradition, so what do we do now? What's the moral framework for our future?
And right into that moral vacuum steps a man named Park In-soo. The press, of course, immediately gave him a nickname.
The Korean Casanova.
Right. And his crime was pretty audacious. He was arrested in 1955, charged with seducing somewhere around 70 women.
And these weren't just any women. Many were from elite backgrounds, university students, the so-called new woman.
And he did it all with a very specific and completely false promise of marriage.
But the thing is, the seduction itself, as scandalous as it was, isn't the real story here. The historical weight, the reason we're talking about it today, is how the courts responded.
The trial became this public arena where old-school Confucian values went head-to-head with this turbulent, American-influenced new world.
And the first punch in that fight was a knockout.
At the initial trial, Park In-soo was found guilty on a minor charge, but he was acquitted on the main one, the one that mattered. 𝐏𝐻𝐵,
which translates to adultery under pretense of marriage.
And the judge, a man named Kwon Soon-young, he summed up his entire legal logic in one single devastating sentence.
A sentence that became instantly infamous. The acquittal was shocking, not because the judge thought Park was innocent, but because he thought the victims weren't worthy of being victims.
Let's just say it, because it defined everything that came after. The judge's dictum was, the law protects only chastity that is worth protecting.
And boom, right there, from the judge's bench, Korean womanhood is legally split into two distinct classes.
On one side, you have the virtuous woman, the one who stays home, guards her sexuality, she gets the state's protection.
And on the other, you have the après-guerre girl, the modernist, the woman who's out in public in a dance hall. And in the judge's view, she had basically forfeited her right to be protected by the law.
So that's our deep dive today. We are going to dissect this case, this ruling, as a proxy war. We'll look at the social pressures that created a Korean Casanova in the first place, the legal thinking that let a judge create a hierarchy of morality, and the 50-year shadow this one sentence cast over law and gender in South Korea. Okay, so to really get why this case was such a bombshell, we need to paint a picture of Seoul in the mid-50s. The sources describe it as just organized chaos.
Utterly. The physical destruction from the war was one thing, but the damage to the social structure was, you could argue, even deeper.
You had this 500-year-old Confucian hierarchy.
The whole system of family, elders, social roles, it was just decimated by the war, by the displacement, the death. Everything that used to be a source of authority was gone.
And that instability creates this really interesting mindset in the younger generation. It's almost a kind of nihilistic hedonism.
Well, yeah. If your past is just ruins and your future is completely uncertain, what's real? The only thing that's real is right now. Immediate pleasure, immediate survival. That was the world Park In-soo was walking into.
And it's interesting the contrast you see between North and South Korea right at this moment.
It's stark.
Right.
In the North, Kim Il-sung is enforcing this iron-fisted, disciplined state control to manage reconstruction. Anti-corruption campaigns, total bureaucracy.
Whereas the South is?
Laissez-faire chaos. It's a free-for-all. The economy is a mess, propped up by foreign aid dollars, and it's rife with corruption. Just people trying to survive day to day.
And that survival instinct was tied to the biggest cultural and economic force in the country, the American military.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. bases were, as one source put it, like portals to another world. They didn't just have guns, they had stuff.
Things you just couldn't get anywhere else.
Exactly. Imagine a country in total scarcity. And then suddenly there are these little islands of abundance, jazz music, nylon stockings, chocolate. These weren't just luxuries. They were symbols of status, of modernity, of a future.
So connecting with American culture became, in a way, a survival strategy.
It was. And this flood of culture was called the 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏, the Western wind.
To young people, this meant new ideas. romantic love, dating without chaperones, even gender equality.
But to the establishment, the older generation, the 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐄 was a threat. It was this corrupting force that was destroying traditional Korean customs.
Which brings us to the gray market. The American PX, the post-exchange, it was the heart of a huge black market economy.
And if you had PX goods or knew someone who did, you had immense social power. This is the backdrop for the woman at the center of this whole moral panic, the pure girl.
Right, a pure, from the French après-guerre, meaning post-war. We should be clear, this wasn't a term they chose for themselves.
No, not at all. It was a label, and a loaded one. The press and conservatives used it as a way to condemn this new generation of women.
It had this double meaning, right? On one hand, modernity, survival.
But on the other, decadence, a loss of tradition, moral decay. She was sort of the successor to the modern girl of the 1920s, but with a key difference. The modern girl was an intellectual rebel.
The pure girl was a product of chaos, a survivor.
Exactly. She understood the new rules of this new material world.
And you could spot her a mile away. Her identity was a visual rebellion, starting with her clothes. She rejected the traditional handbag.
For Western dress, and specifically for the tight-fitting mambo pant.
We think of Audrey Hepburn in Sabrina, but in 1955 Seoul, what did those pants signal?
They were like a triple threat to the old guard. First, just fashion. They were tight. They showed off the female form in a way that was seen as scandalous. It violated all the norms of modesty.
Second, the name itself, mambo.
The mambo dance craze was sweeping through the dance halls, and it was seen as this, sexually liberated, wild, foreign thing. So the pants were linked to that behavior.
But the third thing, and this is critical, was the economics of it.
Right. You couldn't just get the fabric for well-made mambo pants anywhere. It was usually imported, often through the gray market. So wearing them wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a statement of economic power. It showed you were connected.
And her behavior was just as radical.
Oh, totally. The sources say she smoked in public, drank American whiskey, and she completely rejected the traditional arranged marriage system, the jungmae.
She wanted a love marriage, gyeolon.
Yes, based on attraction and, crucially, on her partner's material status, his ability to provide in this new economy.
And this gets to the absolute core of the patriarchal anxiety, her financial independence.
This is what terrified them. Whether through new jobs or through the so-called Yanggangju economy connected to the U.S. bases, these women were earning their own money for the first time on a mass scale.
And the conservative establishment saw a direct line between a woman's money and her sexual morality.
It's a brutal but simple logic. If a woman can support herself, she's no longer under the economic control of her father or husband. And if she's not under their control, she is, in their eyes, sexually ungovernable.
So she becomes the scapegoat.
The perfect scapegoat for everything that's wrong with the country. Government corruption, poverty, the trauma of a war. Just blame the pure girl.
And the main stage for this whole drama was the dance hall, places like Gukhaguan and Nakwonjang.
These places were the epicenter of what the media called chumbaram, the dance wind.
A full-blown moral panic.
Oh, a huge one. Newspapers were obsessed with stories of housewives and educated young women sneaking off to dance halls to dance with strangers. This was revolutionary. A woman could meet a man, talk to him, dance with him, all without a chaperone. It was terrifying to the old guard.
And the police were constantly raiding these places.
Constantly. Men caught dancing could be threatened with being drafted into the army. Women faced public humiliation, getting arrested for violating public morals.
And yet, the dance halls thrived.
They thrived. Through bribes, through the patronage of powerful men, often the same men who were publicly condemning them. So you have this total hypocrisy, a legal gray zone where morality is supposedly being enforced, but in reality, anything goes.
The perfect hunting ground.
The perfect hunting ground for Park In-soo.
Okay, let's talk about the man himself, Park In-soo. Who was he really?
Well, that's the thing. He was basically a nobody. He was in his mid-20s, unemployed. He'd been discharged from the military police, but he had no rank, no status.
He didn't have the background of the women he was targeting?
Not at all. But his genius was that he understood what the new currency was in post-war Seoul. It wasn't about old family names anymore. It was about security. It was about status.
He was handsome, smooth-talking, but his real weapon was the disguise.
The uniform. He didn't just pretend to be an officer. He's very specific. He chose to be a naval captain.
And why was that so effective? What did a naval captain represent in 1955?
It was the absolute pinnacle of desirability. First, a stable paycheck. In a wrecked economy, that's everything. Second, access to the PX. He could get those coveted American goods. And third, just the sheer prestige. In a militarized, chaotic society, he was a figure of authority, a patriot. He commanded trust.
So he gets a forged ID, a convincing uniform, and that uniform is like a key.
It's a master key. It unlocks everything. It gets him into exclusive places like the Navy Officers Club. It gives him total legitimacy.
And his targets were very specific.
Very. He went after educated, westernized women, the pure girls, the ones who dreamed of a modern romance but still needed it to be safe, to be respectable.
His method was always the same. Great manners, confident, a good dancer.
But the core of the deception, the part that made it a crime, was the promise of marriage. The 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓. He wasn't offering a one-night stand. He was offering them their dream.
He was selling them the 𝐾𝐄𝐄𝐏, the love marriage they wanted.
Exactly. But wrapped in the security of a high-status military officer. It was the perfect package.
And the sheer number of victims. 70 confirmed, maybe more. That says something about the society itself, doesn't it?
It speaks to a real desperation. The war had created a huge demographic imbalance. There was a shortage of eligible, stable men. So these educated women were all competing for a very small number of good matches. Park In-soo presented himself as the ultimate prize.
So his victims are caught in this terrible bind, this historical paradox.
Agonizing. They're part of the first generation of mass-educated women. They've been called to aspire to equality, to romance, but society still has this one ironclad rule for them.
Absolute chastity. 정조.
Yes. Their minds were being told they were modern, but their bodies were still treated like traditional property. If they lost their virginity before marriage, they were seen as damaged goods. Their lives were effectively ruined.
And Park exploited that gap perfectly. He knew the promise of marriage was the only thing that could make a sexual relationship socially acceptable for them.
It was the only way to turn what society saw as a moral catastrophe into a legitimate step toward a respectable life.
Which brings us to the moment in the courtroom that just changes everything. Park In-soo, on the stand, makes this incredible claim. He says, "Among the 70 women I met, only one was a virgin."
And that wasn't just him bragging. It was an incredibly shrewd, strategic, legal move.
He was poisoning the well.
Completely. He immediately shifts the entire focus of the trial.
Yeah.
It's no longer about his lies. It's now about the victim's sexual histories. He's weaponizing the deep-seated misogyny of the era.
He's implying that if they weren't virgins, they couldn't have been deceived.
Precisely. He's saying they were already loose. They were consumables. They were just engaging in a mutual transaction for pleasure. They weren't innocent victims who could be tricked by a promise of marriage.
It's the classic Madonna horror dichotomy played out in a courtroom.
A perfect and brutal example of it. And this tactic, this line of reasoning, it becomes the absolute foundation for the judge's shocking decision.
Okay, let's get into the weeds of the law here, because the specific charge is so important. It wasn't just fraud, it was 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐄𝐏.
Right, Article 304 of the 1953 Criminal Code. And it's a very particular kind of law. It's not about adultery in the way we usually think of it, where someone is already married. This was a law specifically targeting seduction.
It punished men who used a false promise of marriage to induce a woman to have sex.
Exactly. It was, in a sense, a paternalistic law. It was designed to protect a woman's chastity in this new, dangerous world of dating and romantic love. It acknowledged how high the stakes were for women.
But, and this is the crucial part, the law had a built-in escape hatch, a loophole.
A huge one. The law only applied if the victim was, and this is the direct phrasing, not habitually immoral.
Ah, so there it is.
There it is. That was the pivot point of the entire case. The law was written to protect the innocent girl next door, but it was explicitly designed to exclude women who were deemed unworthy. Sex workers, or just any woman considered loose.
And Judge Kwan's final ruling rested entirely on how he chose to interpret not habitually immoral.
Completely. At that first trial, Park gets a tiny fine for impersonating an officer. Yeah. But on the main charge, the one involving 70 victims, a full acquittal.
Because the judge bought Park's defense.
He bought it hook, line, and sinker. The fact that these women were going to public dance halls was, for the judge, all the evidence he needed.
In his mind, a woman who goes to a dance hall, who dances with a stranger, she's not there looking for a husband.
She's seeking pleasure. That was his argument. He basically transformed the crime from deception into a mutual transaction that just went sour.
He literally said, and this is just stunning, if a woman readily offers her body after a brief meeting at a dance hall, it is valid to see this as her choosing a path of pleasure.
So he's ruling that her choice to be in that space, to engage in that modern behavior, legally cancels out her status as a victim. It's an incredible leap of logic.
And it all comes together in that one infamous line, the dictum. The law protects only chastity that is worth protecting.
And we have to pause on that, because that phrase did so much more than just acquit one man. It became a legal and moral dividing line for an entire generation. It created a state-sanctioned hierarchy of womanhood.
Let's break that down. Tier 1 is
Protected chastity. This belongs to the virgin, the traditional girl who stays home. If a man deceives her, the law will come down on him like a hammer.
And Tier 2.
Unprotected chastity. This is for the pure girl, the dancer, the woman in the mambo pants. The moment she steps into that dance hall, she has, in the court's eyes, compromised herself. Her subsequent sexual encounter isn't a violation of trust, it's a transaction of pleasure.
So she's not a victim of a crime, she's just a disappointed customer.
Essentially, yes. The ruling was a terrifying signal from the state. If you step outside the traditional domestic sphere, you're stepping outside the protection of the law.
The public reaction must have been immediate.
Ferocious, and it split right down gender lines. A lot of men, according to the sources, saw Park as this kind of folk hero, a rogue who exposed the hypocrisy of these vanity-filled women they thought were just gold diggers chasing officers.
So he was almost admired, in a way.
In a twisted way, yes.
Yeah.
But women's groups were, of course, absolutely furious. They saw the verdict for what it was, a green light for men to lie and exploit any woman who participated in modern life.
They were pointing out the insane double standard. A man can go to a dance hall and he's just having fun. A woman does the same thing and she loses her legal rights.
Precisely. The outcry was so huge that the prosecution had to appeal.
And the appellate court, they had to deal with the fallout of this dictum.
They had to. And what they did was legally very interesting. They did overturn the acquittal, but they had to carefully dismantle Judge Kwan's logic. They rejected the idea that just being in a dance hall automatically makes you habitually immoral.
So they're saying that dancing, even if it's seen as immoral by some, doesn't mean you can't be legally deceived.
Exactly. They shifted the focus back to where it should have been, on Park In-soo's criminal intent. They ruled that the crime was committed if the promise of marriage was the thing that induced the consent. It didn't matter where it happened.
So Park In-soo was finally convicted and sentenced.
He was. The Supreme Court upheld it. But he only got 1 year in prison.
1 year for 70 victims.
It's telling, isn't it? The law was technically corrected, but the sentence was so light. It suggests that while the legal principle was fixed, the establishment's sympathy still, in many ways, lay with Judge Kwan's original assessment. The women got their conviction, but they were shamed forever by that first ruling.
This case is such a powerful lens for looking at post-war Korean society, because it really wasn't just about a con man. It was about the state trying to manage national trauma by controlling women's bodies.
That's the absolute heart of it. You have to connect this idea of 𝐃𝐄𝐄, or chastity, to the trauma of the 1950s. Historically, it was about clan purity, a patrilineal asset.
But after the war, and especially with the memory of things like the comfort women issue, it took on a new meaning.
It became linked to national shame. The loss of chastity wasn't just a personal matter, it was framed as a national wound.
So the ideal woman, the one the state wanted to promote, was the Hayeonmo Yangkyo, the wise mother, good wife.
The pure, resilient girl who would help rebuild the nation, untainted.
And from that perspective, Judge Kwan's ruling starts to look like something else.
It looks like moral triage. By refusing to protect the purer girls, the ones who were soiled by Western influence, the state was making a strategic decision. It was deciding where to spend its moral and legal energy.
And it decided not to spend it on women who deviated from the official path.
Exactly. And the location of the crime, the dance hall, is so symbolic. It was a zone of exception, a place where the old rules didn't apply, where individual pleasure, foreign music, it was a space of freedom.
And therefore, a space of danger in the eyes of the establishment.
Terrifying to them. And the verdict was the state's attempt to shut that down. It was a form of spatial policing. The message was clear. Stay out of the public sphere. Go back to the domestic sphere where you're safe and where we will protect you.
It's amazing how the same anxiety was playing out in popular culture at the exact same time.
Oh, the timing is incredible. This whole scandal is unfolding right alongside the phenomena of Madame Freedom. First a novel, then a massive blockbuster film in 1956.
And the plot of Madame Freedom sounds familiar.
It's the exact same moral panic. It's about a respectable professor's wife who gets tempted by the exact same things. Dance halls, Western clothes, mambo dancing. She even gets a job in a store that sells Western goods, tying her directly to that gray market economy.
So both the real-life trial and the fictional movie are obsessed with the same idea.
That female freedom, specifically economic and social freedom expressed in a Western way, will lead to the collapse of the Korean family.
And the punishments are parallel too. In the film, the heroine faces humiliation and ruin.
And in the real case, the victims face legal abandonment. It's the same social judgment, just delivered through different means.
So sociologically, what was the function of this obsession?
It was a coping mechanism for the entire nation. It's so much easier to get angry about the moral failings of a few women in mambo pants than it is to confront the real massive problems.
Yeah.
Government corruption, crushing poverty, the national trauma of a divided country.
The pure girl became the scapegoat for a society in pain.
She embodied all the risks and the frightening promises of the new world. It was easier to punish her than to fix the world she lived in.
And before we get to the end of this law's story, we have to talk about its legacy, the Park In-soo defense.
Right. The scandal itself fades, but Article 304 stays on the books for another 50 years. And it continues to work as this paternalistic tool, policing women's sexuality.
So defense attorneys, for decades, would use this same logic in court.
It became a standard playbook. If your client was accused of seduction or sexual fraud, you didn't have to prove he was innocent. You just had to prove the victim was unworthy.
You put her on trial.
You dig into her past, her dating history, what she wears, if she drinks, anything to paint her as habitually immoral, and therefore, in the spirit of Judge Kwan's ruling, not a credible victim.
Her entire life could be used against her.
For half a century, women in Korean courtrooms had their sexual and social histories weaponized against them, all because of the precedent set in this one case. It forced women to live under a constant threat. Act like a traditional woman, or you forfeit your right to justice.
Which brings us finally to the end of the line for this law. The year is 2009.
A full 54 years later, after many, many challenges, the Constitutional Court of Korea takes up the case of Article 304, adultery under pretense of marriage. And on November 26, 2009, they rule it unconstitutional.
And the ruling is so powerful because the court's logic is the exact opposite of Judge Kwan's.
It's a perfect philosophical inversion, where the 1955 court was all about protecting a specific, state-sanctioned version of morality.
The 2009 court was all about individual rights.
Exactly. Let's compare them. The first and most important principle the 2009 court established was sexual self-determination.
What does that mean in this context?
It means the government has no business getting involved in the private sexual lives of consenting adults. Whether a promise was made and broken is a private matter, not a criminal one. It was a complete rejection of state paternalism.
And second, they took on the gender inequality baked into the law.
They found that Article 304 was insulting. It treated women like children, like incompetent beings who couldn't make their own decisions and needed the state to protect them from bad choices. They said it violated their fundamental dignity as equal citizens.
And most importantly, they threw out the whole chastity test.
Gone. The court officially declared that a person's right to legal protection cannot and should not be based on their sexual history. The very concept was outdated and unconstitutional.
So the abolition of this law was, in effect, the final legal end of the Park In-soo era.
It was. It legally tore down that wall Judge Kwan had built between protected and unprotected women. The law finally caught up with the reality of modern democratic South Korea.
But there was also a global context to this, wasn't there? This wasn't happening in a vacuum.
No, and that's a great point. By 2009, South Korea is a global economic powerhouse, a member of the OECD. It was becoming an international anomaly to have these kinds of paternalistic laws still on the books. So yes, it was a victory for women's rights, but it was also a necessary step to align the country's legal system with global democratic norms.
The law changed. But as this whole story shows, changing the law is one thing, changing the culture is another.
And culture is stubborn. The legal text is gone, but the cultural logic of that 1955 dictum, it's still with us.
This is the relevance for all of us listening today. When you see modern cases of sexual assault or harassment, and the first questions are about the victim. What was she wearing? Had she been drinking? Why was she there?
You are hearing the ghost of Judge Kwan's dictum. You are witnessing the direct cultural descendant of that logic.
The idea that there's a good victim and a bad victim.
Exactly. The good victim is quiet, modest at home. The bad victim was out, she was loud, she was asking for it. That narrative is still so powerful in the media, online, everywhere. It's the lingering echo of a judge who said more than half a century ago that some people are simply not worth protecting.
So when you put it all together, what does this 50-year legal drama really mean? The Park In-soo case was a perfect storm, wasn't it?
It really was. You have a charismatic predator who knew exactly which social anxieties to exploit. You have a generation of women caught between tradition and a desperate desire for a modern life.
And you have a legal system in a complete panic trying to slam the brakes on a world that's changing way too fast.
Park In-soo himself, he wasn't the cause. He was a symptom of this giant, painful gap between the ideal of the virtuous Korean woman and the unstoppable reality of desire, romance, and self-determination.
And Judge Kwan's famous line, "The law protects only chastity that is worth protecting." It feels like a monument to a patriarchal system's last stand against the Western wind.
It was a desperate attempt to hold back the tide by sacrificing the rights of the women who dared to swim in it.
The 2009 ruling was a huge legal victory, a triumph. It finally got the state out of the private lives of its citizens. But this deep dive really shows us how far culture can lag behind the law. And that leaves us with a pretty challenging final thought.
It does. If the whole point of law is to protect the vulnerable, to uphold equality, what is our responsibility as a society to make sure our cultural stories catch up? To make sure the narratives we tell ourselves about who is and who isn't worth protecting actually align with our highest legal ideals. Because the next time you see victim blaming online or in the news, just take a second and consider whether what you're really hearing is the faint echo of a judge's voice speaking to us all the way from 1955.